The black family was being auctioned for $5 until the lonely rancher shouted, "I take all." Gasps from the crowd. Boots scrape. A wagon creaks as the family is led away. At first, it seemed like salvation, a desperate mother and her children finally rescued from shame. But on the frontier, nothing comes without a price. The slam of a jail door, a judge's gavel, a gun cocking in the shadows. The rancher has enemies: the railroad, the banker, the sheriff, and they will use every lie, every weapon to tear apart the new family he's dared to protect. Thunder of hooves, a hymn sung softly under lamplight. A boy dragged away in chains. What secret papers lie buried in the courthouse? And can one act of mercy stand against a town bent on breaking them? Silence, then the rancher's voice, steady and defiant. "I won't let them take you." Will faith and courage be enough to save them more? Will justice be silenced on the Colorado frontier? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. For more, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse square as Aurora Johnson stood on the wooden platform, her heart pounding beneath her threadbare dress. She drew her children closer, feeling Isaiah's trembling anger, Ruth's confusion, and little Hannah's fingers clutching her skirts. The crowd's jeering faces blurred through her unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. Her husband had died with dignity serving in the colored troops. She would face this humiliation with the same strength. Banker Edwin Pike's voice cut through the humid air, smooth as silk, but dripping with false concern. "Now, folks, let's be reasonable. These unfortunates need proper placement. The deceased Mr. Johnson's debts must be settled." He flourished a stack of papers, though Aurora knew in her heart they were filled with lies. Her husband's pension had disappeared into Pike's keeping, along with their hopes for independence. $3. Someone shouted from the crowd. $2.06, called another, followed by cruel laughter. Pike's smile never wavered as the bids dropped, lower and lower. $5, he announced. "Surely someone sees the value in strong workers. I take all." The deep voice rolled like thunder across the square. The crowd parted, revealing a tall figure at its edge. Paul Hale stood straight-backed in his dusty range clothes, his face weathered by sun and time. Aurora had glimpsed him once or twice. In town over the years, a shadow of a man who kept to himself since losing his wife. Now his presence commanded attention. "Mr. Hale," Pike's voice held a note of uncertainty. "This is unexpected. Perhaps we should discuss." The rancher strode forward, boots striking the packed earth with purpose. He reached into his vest and pulled out a handful of silver dollars that gleamed in the slanting sunlight. $10, he declared, letting the coins fall onto the platform with solid clicks. "More than fair for your false claims, Pike." Atia stepped forward, protective instinct warring with their desperate situation. "Mama," he whispered, "we don't know this man." Aurora squeezed his shoulder, watching Paul Hale's face. There was something in his steady gaze that spoke of more than mere business, a flash of remembered pain, of understanding. When he looked at her children, she saw no malice, only a deep, quiet certainty. "The matter is settled then," Paul stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned to Aurora, removing his hat with careful courtesy. "Ma'am, my wagon's just yonder. It's a fair piece to the ranch. Best we start before dark." Pike stepped forward, papers rustling. "Now see here, Hale, the railroad has interests. The railroad can speak to my lawyer in Denver." Paul's voice hardened. "Unless you'd rather explain to him how a widow's pension papers disappeared while in your care." The banker's face flushed, but he stepped back, forced smile still in place. "As you wish, Mr. Hale. The debt is transferred to you." He turned away, already moving toward his office with quick steps. The crowd lingered, whispers rising like wind through dry grass. Paul ignored them, offering his hand to help Aurora down from the platform. She hesitated only a moment before accepting, feeling the strength and calluses of honest work in his grip. Ruth and Hannah followed, wide-eyed but quiet, sensing the gravity of the moment. Isaiah descended last, standing tall despite his youth. "Sir," he began, "I can work." "Whatever you need done, we'll speak of work later," Paul cut in, not unkindly. "For now, let's get you folks home before sunset." His wagon waited in the shade of a cottonwood tree, two steady draft horses stamping quietly in their harness. Paul helped them climb aboard, ensuring the girls were settled safely in the back before offering Aurora the seat beside him. Isaiah sat with his sisters, his young face set in lines of worried determination. As Paul clicked to the horses, the wagon rolled forward, leaving the courthouse square behind. Aurora felt the weight of staring eyes fall away as they turned onto the dusty road leading out of town. The late summer air stirred, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "Mr. Hale," she said quietly, "I don't know how to thank you." He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "No thanks needed, Mrs. Johnson." "What?" "They were doing wasn't right, but surely you don't want the burden of, 'My ranch has room,'" he interrupted. "Work too, if you're willing. The rest can wait till we're proper settled." Aurora studied his profile, seeing the years of solitude etched there. Yet there was something else, a flicker of life rekindling in eyes that had been empty too long. She thought of her own grief, the long nights of worry for her children's future, and felt a whisper of hope stir in her heart. Ruth's voice drifted from the back of the wagon, quiet but clear. "Mama, look meadowlarks." She pointed to where the birds rose from the grass, their songs carrying sweet and clear over the creak of wagon wheels. "Yes, child," Aurora answered, managing a smile. "They're singing us home." Paul's hands tightened slightly on the reins, but he said nothing. The wagon rolled on as the sun sank toward the mountains, taking them away from shame and toward an uncertain future that somehow felt more like a beginning than an ending. Hannah had fallen, asleep against Isaiah's shoulder by the time the first fence lines of the Hale Ranch appeared. The posts stood straight against the darkening sky, though some repairs were clearly needed. Fields stretched out on either side, showing signs of careful planning but recent neglect. "It ain't much to look at right now," Paul said, breaking his long silence. "Been running it alone too long. But the water's good, soil's rich when worked proper." "We're not afraid of work, Mr. Hale," Aurora assured him. He nodded, guiding the horses through the main gate. "No, ma'am, I don't reckon you are." The house came into view, a solid two-story structure of weathered wood and native stone. A wide porch wrapped around three sides, empty of the rocking chairs and potted plants that might once have graced it. Light from the setting sun caught the windows, making them glow like welcome beacons. Paul drew the wagon to a stop near the house. "It needs a woman's touch," he said gruffly, not meeting Aurora's eyes. "Been too long since, well, too long." He cleared his throat. "There's rooms upstairs for the young ones. Main bedrooms, yours, off the kitchen. I'll take the back room." "By the stairs." "Mr. Hale," Aurora began. "We couldn't possibly, Paul," he corrected quietly. "Best call me Paul, if we're to be family." He paused, adding carefully, "Even if it's just for appearance's sake, till you get your feet under you proper." Isaiah had woken his sisters, and now they all sat quietly, watching this exchange. Aurora felt the weight of their future in this moment, the dignity this man had offered them when others would have seen them bound in virtual slavery. "Very well, Paul," she said, "though you must call me Aurora." A ghost of a smile touched his lips as he nodded. He climbed down from the wagon and helped them all descend, his movements gentle despite his size. Hannah stumbled, half asleep. and he caught her automatically, setting her safely on her feet. "Isaiah," Paul called, "help me with your mama's trunk. Girls, mind your mother. Aurora, you'll find the kitchen stocked not much, but enough for tonight. Tomorrow we'll see about proper supplies." The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky as they mounted the porch steps. Paul produced a key, its brass surface reflecting the last light of day. The door opened with a creak of disuse, revealing shadows and silence within. But as Aurora crossed the threshold, a warm evening breeze followed them inside, stirring the stillness. She heard Ruth's soft gasp of wonder at the grand old staircase, saw Isaiah's shoulders straighten as Paul showed him where to set the trunk, felt Hannah's small hand slip into hers with perfect trust. Paul lit a lamp, its glow pushing back the shadows. In its light, Aurora saw not just a house, but a home waiting to be reclaimed. The walls held memories of better days, and perhaps the promise of more to come. She offered a silent prayer of thanksgiving, and as she looked up, she caught Paul watching her with an expression that mirrored her own cautious hope. The wagon creaked along the dusty road, each rotation of its wooden wheels carrying them further from town and deeper into the Colorado wilderness. Paul handled the reins with practiced ease, keeping the pace steady but unhurried. Behind him, Aurora and her children huddled together in watchful silence, their few possessions secured beneath a worn tarpaulin. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the trail as Aurora studied their benefactor's broad back. Paul Hale sat straight in his seat, his attention fixed on the road ahead. Though his intervention had saved them from a cruel fate, uncertainty gnawed at her. What kind of man would take responsibility for an entire family of strangers? "Mama," Hannah whispered, tugging at Aurora's sleeve. "Where are we going?" Aurora drew her youngest closer. "To Mr. Hale's ranch, child. Is it far?" Ruth asked, her voice carrying a tremor of weariness. Before Aurora could answer, Paul spoke. "Without turning, another day's journey. We'll make camp by Miller's Creek tonight." His voice was deep but gentle, like distant thunder without the threat of storm. Isaiah sat alert, taking in every detail of the passing landscape. The boy's shoulders were tense, ready to protect his family if needed. Aurora's heart ached with pride at her son's courage. Even as she prayed such courage wouldn't be necessary, as the sun began its descent toward the mountain peaks. Paul guided the wagon off the main trail toward the sound of running water. The horses' hooves crunched through dry grass until they reached a creek bordered by cottonwood trees. Their leaves whispered in the evening breeze, a sound like soft rainfall. "We'll rest here," Paul announced, bringing the wagon to a stop. He climbed down, his movements efficient and purposeful. "Isaiah, help me tend to the horses." Isaiah glanced at his mother, who nodded permission. The boy scrambled down, eager to prove his worth. While Paul showed Isaiah how to properly care for the tired draft horses, Aurora helped her daughters from the wagon. The creek burbled nearby, its clear water catching the last rays of sunlight. Ruth and Hannah watched wide-eyed as Paul retrieved a bundle from the wagon's storage box. "Ain't much," he said, unwrapping bread, dried beans, and a small pot. "But it'll fill empty bellies." Aurora stepped forward. "Let me cook, Mr. Hale. It's the least I can do." He nodded, something like relief crossing his weathered features. Soon, a small fire crackled between river stones, the pot of beans warming over the flames. The bread was divided, and despite their circumstances, the simple meal felt like a feast to their hungry bodies. As they ate, Paul cleared his throat. "Mrs. Johnson," he began, his voice serious, "I need to make something clear." He set aside his tin plate, meeting Aurora's eyes directly. "What I did back there, Rye didn't buy you as servants. That's not what this is." Aurora stiffened. "But Paul, Continued, "My ranch needs work. True enough. More than one man can handle. But I offered because what they were doing wasn't right, and I had the means to stop it." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm offering you a place to live free. In exchange for honest work, nothing more, nothing less." The crackling fire filled the silence that followed. Aurora studied him, searching for any hint of deception. She found none. "We will repay you," she said firmly. "Through labor, as you say. We're not looking for charity." Paul nodded, accepting her terms without argument. Isaiah, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "Sir, are there horses to ride at your ranch?" "Several that need breaking," Paul replied. "And fences that need mending. Stock to tend, too." He glanced at the boy with quiet approval. Could use a strong back and willing hands for all of it. Isaiah sat straighter, pride visible in his young face. Ruth and Hannah had curled up together near the fire, their eyes growing heavy with exhaustion, as night settled fully around them. Paul helped Aurora make a comfortable spot for the children in the wagon bed. He then withdrew to the other side of the fire, laying out his bedroll with deliberate distance. Aurora sat beside her sleeping children, her voice barely a whisper as she prayed. "Lord, give me strength for whatever lies ahead. Watch over my little ones." And if this man's heart be true, she left the rest unspoken, watching the stars wheel. Overhead, through breaks in the cottonwood branches, dawn arrived with a chorus of meadowlarks and the soft nickering of horses. They ate a quick breakfast of leftover bread, then resumed their journey as pink light painted the eastern sky. The wagon climbed steadily into higher country, the air growing cooler and thinner. Ruth and Hannah watched in fascination as prairie dogs stood at attention near their burrows, chittering at the passing wagon before diving underground. Isaiah pointed out a distant herd of pronghorn antelope, their white rumps flashing as they bounded away. By mid-morning, Paul drew the horses to a stop at the crest of a long ridge. "There it is," he said quietly. Aurora rose slightly, following his gesture. Below them stretched a valley, green with summer grass despite the late season. A creek wound through it like a silver ribbon, and near its bank stood a 2-story ranch house. Though weather-beaten, its bones were solid, built of sturdy logs and local stone. A barn leaned slightly to one side, its red paint faded to a dusty rose. Several corrals stood empty, their fences showing signs of neglect. The pastures beyond had grown wild, but the soil was clearly rich. Aurora released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The sight brought equal measures of relief and apprehension. This remote place could be either sanctuary or prison. Everything depended on the true nature of the man beside her. "It needs work," Paul admitted, reading her expression.
"I've been to."
Long without a proper family to care for it. Hannah pressed against her mother's side. "It looks like a castle, Mama." "More like a fortress," Isaiah murmured. But there was excitement in his voice rather than fear. Paul clicked to the horses, starting them down the winding road into the valley. "There's a good spring house," he offered. "Root cellar too. Previous owner built it right, even if I haven't kept it up as I should." Ruth pointed to a patch of yellow near the house. "Look, flowers, wild sunflowers," Paul confirmed. "They come back every year, no matter how hard the winter." He glanced briefly at Aurora. "Stubborn things won't be driven out." She caught his meaning and lifted her chin slightly. "Yes, some things do take root and thrive, despite all odds." The wagon rolled on, carrying them toward the ranch house that waited below. Aurora felt the weight of the moment settle around them. This place represented either the end of their troubles or the beginning of new ones. But as she watched Paul's careful handling of the horses, noted the genuine warmth in his voice when he spoke to Isaiah, she allowed herself to hope just a little that they had found not just shelter, but a true refuge. The wagon rolled into Paul's ranch yard as the late morning sun climbed high overhead. Weathered fence posts marked the boundary, their rails showing gaps where wood had rotted away. The ranch house stood before them, 2 stories of solid logs and local stone that had weathered countless seasons. Its porch sagged slightly at the corners, but the foundation remained true. Paul brought the horses to a stop near the front steps. "It's not much," he said quietly, "but it's shelter." Aurora surveyed the building, noting the thick walls and sturdy roof. Despite its worn appearance, she could see the bones of a real home beneath the neglect. Ruth and Hannah pressed close to her sides as Paul helped them down from the wagon. "Let's get you settled inside first," Paul said, lifting their few belongings. From the wagon bed, "Isaiah, once we've done that, I'll show you the barn." The front door creaked open, revealing a main room thick with dust and cobwebs. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows, catching motes that danced in the air. Aurora's eyes adjusted to the dim interior, taking in the simple furnishings: a wooden table with chairs, a few shelves lined with dishes, and most importantly, a cast-iron wood stove that would provide both heat and cooking space. "Girls," Aurora said, already rolling up her sleeves, "let's see what we can do about this dust." She turned to Paul. "Is there a well?" He nodded. "Just behind the house. Pump still works good." He shifted uncomfortably, as if seeing the state of his home through new eyes. Been a while since anyone's given these rooms a proper cleaning. Ruth and Hannah had already discovered a broom in the corner, though it was nearly as dusty as the floors it was meant to sweep. Aurora found a bucket and headed outside to the pump, its iron handle squealing in protest until clear water finally gushed forth. While Aurora and the girls began their attack on years of accumulated dirt, Paul led Isaiah toward the barn. The boy's eyes widened at the sight of the horses in the corral, thin but proud creatures that watched them approach with pricked ears. "Only got 6 head of cattle left," Paul explained as they entered the barn. "Used to run more, but," he trailed off, gesturing at the broken fencing visible through the open doors. "Things got away from me after my wife passed. Didn't see much point in keeping up with it all." Isaiah ran a hand along a weathered post. "I can help fix these fences, sir. My pa taught me some before." Now it was his turn to leave words unsaid. Paul nodded, understanding in his eyes. "We can start tomorrow, if you're willing. Got tools and wire, just needed another pair of hands." He showed Isaiah where the tack was stored, explaining which horses needed exercise and which ones still needed breaking back in the house. Aurora had opened every window to let fresh air chase away the musty smell. Ruth and Hannah had taken it upon themselves to gather wildflowers from the yard, filling a cracked pottery vase with bright yellow sunflowers and purple prairie clover. "Look, Mama," Hannah held up a particularly large sunflower. "It's like having sunshine right on the table." Aurora smiled, pausing in her sweeping to kiss her daughter's forehead. "That it is, sweet girl. That it is." The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Aurora discovered provisions in the root cellar: dried beans, cornmeal, and wrinkled apples that were still good enough to eat. She set about preparing supper while continuing to clean, determined to make at least the kitchen properly habitable before nightfall. As evening approached, Paul and Isaiah returned from their work in the barn. Both were dusty, but wearing expressions of satisfaction at progress made. The house had transformed in their absence. Though far from perfect, the main room now felt lived in rather than abandoned. The wooden table gleamed from scrubbing, the flowers adding a touch of beauty that had long been missing. Aurora lit the lamp as darkness fell, its gentle glow warming the room. The aroma of beans simmering with a ham bone Paul had provided filled the air, while cornbread baked in the wood stove. Ruth and Hannah set out the mismatched plates they'd washed earlier, proud of their contribution to making supper proper. When all was ready, They gathered around the table. Paul seemed almost startled when Aurora bowed her head, her voice trembling but firm as she spoke. "Dear Lord, we thank you for this food, for shelter from storm, and for the kindness of strangers who become friends. Watch over this house and all who dwell within it. Amen." "Amen," her children echoed. Paul remained silent, head bowed, but something in his expression suggested he was touched by the return of prayer to his home. They ate by lamplight, the simple meal tasting like a feast. After their long journey, the children's voices filled the once quiet house with questions about tomorrow's tasks and observations about their new home. Paul answered when spoken to, his replies brief but gentle, as if he was slowly remembering how to engage in family. Conversation after supper, Aurora insisted on cleaning up while Paul helped the children arrange pallets near the stove. The nights could be cool in the high country, even in summer. Soon, the sound of deep, even breathing indicated that exhaustion had claimed the young ones. Aurora stood at the sink, drying the last plate when Paul approached. She turned to face him, her expression serious in the lamp's glow. "Mr. Hale," she began, "I need to thank you properly for what you did today. You saved us from," she swallowed hard, "from a fate I don't like to think about." Paul shifted uncomfortably. Wasn't right what they were doing. No, it wasn't. Aurora's chin lifted slightly. "But I want you to know we will earn our place. Here, I don't accept charity, even kind charity. My children and I will work hard to repay your trust." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Never doubted that, Mrs. Johnson." He glanced around the transformed room. "Already can see the difference you've made." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken questions about how this arrangement would work, how they would navigate the days ahead. Finally, Paul cleared his throat. "My room's upstairs," he said. "You and the girls can take the other bedroom up there. Isaiah can bed down in the small room off the kitchen if he likes. More private than out here." "Thank you," Aurora replied, softly, "for everything." Paul retreated up the stairs, his boots making the old steps creak. In his room, he sat on the edge of his bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of other people settling in for the night. The house felt different, already warmer somehow, more alive. The scent of cornbread lingered in the air, and a child's sock lay forgotten by the stairs. Such small things, yet they marked the end of his solitude in ways both unsettling and strangely comforting below. Aurora tucked an extra blanket around her sleeping children before preparing her own bed. The events of the day swirled in her mind, the humiliation in town, the long journey, and now this unexpected sanctuary. She whispered a final prayer of gratitude, letting exhaustion finally claim her as the lamp burned low. The house settled around them, creaking softly in the night wind. Through the window, stars wheeled overhead, witnesses to the first night this collection of wounded souls spent under one roof. Beginning their journey from strangers to family, dawn broke over the Colorado ranch with a chorus of roosters announcing the new day. Paul Hale stirred in his bed, an unfamiliar aroma drawing him from sleep. The scent of fresh biscuits wafted up through the floorboards, accompanied by the soft clatter of pots and pan sounds his kitchen hadn't known in years. He dressed quickly and descended the creaking stairs to find Aurora Johnson already busy at the stove, her hands dusted with flour. A batch of golden brown biscuits cooled on the wooden table, steam rising in the early morning light. "Hope you don't mind," Aurora said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Found some flour in the pantry, still good for use." "Mind." Paul shook his head, reaching for a biscuit. "Can't remember the last time I woke to fresh baking." Ruth and Hannah sat at the table, their faces bright with anticipation as Aurora served up the warm bread with butter and the last of yesterday's preserves. Isaiah joined them moments later, already dressed for work in his sturdy trousers and boots. "Mr. Hale," Isaiah spoke up as he finished his second biscuit, What needs doing first today? Paul set down his coffee cup. Fences won't mend themselves. Figured we'd start there. Check the stock while we're at it. He glanced at Isaiah's eager expression. Might show you how to handle one of the gentler horses later, if you're up for it. Yes, sir. Isaiah's face lit up. I'm ready to learn whatever you can teach me. After breakfast, Paul and Isaiah headed out while Aurora turned her attention to the neglected linens she'd discovered in a trunk upstairs. She hauled them outside to wash, setting up near the pump where she could keep an eye on Ruth and Hannah as they played. The girls' laughter carried across the yard as they chased each other through patches of prairie grass, their dark braids flying. The sound drew a slight smile from Paul as he and Isaiah loaded tools and fence posts into the wagon. The morning passed in steady work. Paul showed Isaiah how to string wire between posts, explaining the importance of proper tension. The boy proved attentive, asking smart questions and throwing himself into the physical labor without complaint. My PA always said honest work was its own blessing, Isaiah commented as they paused to drink from their canteens. Paul nodded, studying the boy's profile. Your father taught you well. By midday, they'd repaired a good stretch of fence line. Paul led Isaiah back to the barn, where several horses watched them with interest. He selected a steady bay mare, showing Isaiah how to approach her carefully. Always let them know where you are, Paul explained, demonstrating how to speak softly and move deliberately. Horse needs to trust you before anything else. Isaiah absorbed every word, mimicking Paul's movements exactly. When the mare allowed him to stroke her neck, his face broke into a proud grin. She likes me. That she does, Paul agreed, impressed by the boy's natural way with the animal. Got a good touch with her. They spent an hour working with the mare, Paul teaching Isaiah the basics of handling and care. The boy's quick learning and genuine enthusiasm reminded Paul of his own youth, learning ranch work at his father's side. Back at the house, Aurora had transformed the yard into a makeshift laundry, with clean sheets and quilts hanging in the warm breeze. The girls had settled into helping her, carrying water and sorting clothes into piles. The afternoon sun was sliding toward the mountains. When dust rose on the road leading to the ranch, Paul straightened from his work, shading his eyes to watch three riders approaching. Neighbors, he told Isaiah quietly. Don't get many visitors out here. The riders, 2 men and a woman, reined in their horses at the yard gate. Curious expressions evident as they took in the scene before them. Smoke rose steadily from the chimney. Laundry fluttered on the lines, and children's voices carried from behind the house. Paul Hale, called the older man, dismounting, saw the smoke and had to see for ourselves if you'd finally decided to rejoin the living. Paul walked over to greet them, conscious of Aurora emerging from the house, her daughters peeking around her skirts. Tom, Martha, Jim, he nodded to each in turn. Come have some coffee if you've time. The neighbors followed him onto the porch, their eyes darting between Paul and his unexpected house guests. Aurora brought out coffee and the last of the mornings. Biscuits, carrying herself with quiet dignity as she made introductions. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Johnson, Martha said, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The men nodded politely, but Paul noticed the way Tom's gaze shifted uneasily. The conversation that followed was strained with undercurrents of curiosity and judgment. Questions about Aurora's arrival were asked obliquely, answered simply. Isaiah joined them briefly, earning appraising looks as he reported on the day's fence work. Seems you found yourself some help, Paul, Jim commented, his tone careful. That I have, Paul replied firmly. Good help, too. Aurora served the coffee with grace, speaking when spoken to, but otherwise maintaining a dignified silence. Ruth and Hannah stayed close to their mother, unusually quiet under the scrutiny of strange eyes. When the neighbors finally mounted up to leave, their farewell waves were polite but reserved. Aurora stood straight-backed beside Paul until the riders disappeared down the road. "Thank you," she said softly, "for welcoming us into your home." Paul shifted uncomfortably. "Don't get many visitors out here. Not much for company, truth be." Told Aurora's lips curved slightly. Perhaps that might change now. A home needs people coming and going now and then. Keeps it alive. As dusk approached, Isaiah brought in an armload of kindling for the stove. Aurora moved about the kitchen, preparing a hearty stew, her voice lifting in a gentle hymn as she worked. The familiar melody of Amazing Grace filled the house, accompanied by the girls' sweet voices joining in on the chorus. Paul stepped out onto the porch, ostensibly to check the weather, but found himself lingering in the growing darkness. The hymn drifted through the open window, stirring memories he'd long buried his mother singing in the kitchen. His wife's voice raised in church. He leaned against the porch post, listening as Aurora's rich alto wove through the evening air. Something inside his chest seemed to loosen, like a knot slowly coming undone. The music spoke of faith and hope, of grace freely given. And Paul found himself unexpectedly moved by its simple truth. The sky deepened to purple, stars beginning to glimmer overhead. Inside, the lamp cast warm light through the windows, and the aroma of stew mingled with the sweet notes of Aurora's hymn. Paul remained on the porch, letting the peace of the moment wash over him, knowing that somehow, in just one day, his silent ranch had begun to transform into something he'd almost forgotten. Home. The summer sun rose earlier each morning, painting the Colorado sky in streaks of pink and gold. As dawn crept over Paul Hale's ranch, a steady rhythm settled into place. The past week had brought more changes than the old homestead had seen in years. Aurora woke first each day, stirring the cook stove to life while dew still sparkled on the grass. The aroma of coffee and cornbread soon drew the others from their beds. Isaiah would head out with Paul after breakfast, eager to learn more about ranch work. Ruth and Hannah helped their mother with household tasks, their cheerful voices drifting. Through open windows, mind that seam, Aurora guided Ruth as they mended Paul's work shirts together. Small, even stitches make it strong. Hannah swept the porch with determination, though her efforts sometimes created more dust than they removed. Still, Aurora praised her enthusiasm. "That's it, sugar. Every bit of work counts in making a home." Out in the corrals, Paul showed Isaiah how to repair loose boards and strengthen gate hinges. The boy's quick mind absorbed every lesson, from the proper angle to split wood to the way to approach nervous cattle. "Like this, Mr. Hale," Isaiah called, demonstrating his improved rope. "Work." Paul nodded approval. "Coming along fine. Your PA would be proud to see you working so steady." Their days fell into a comfortable pattern. Mornings brought chores and repairs. Afternoons saw 2 livestock and field work. In the evenings, they gathered around the table for simple but filling meals: beans with salt pork, fresh bread, whatever vegetables Aurora could coax from the neglected kitchen garden. After supper, Aurora would lead the children in hymns while she cleaned up. Paul found himself looking forward to these quiet moments when Amazing Grace or Sweet Hour of Prayer filled the once silent house. Sometimes he caught himself humming along as he cleaned his rifle or checked his ledgers, but peace rarely goes unchallenged. On the 8th morning, just as Paul and Isaiah prepared to start building a new sheep pen, hoofbeats approached from the road. A cloud of dust announced a rider moving at a purposeful clip. Paul straightened, recognizing the glint of a deputy's badge. "Isaiah, go help your mother in the house." The boy hesitated, clearly wanting to stay, but nodded and walked away. Paul waited as Deputy Wilson rode up, noting the man's tight expression. "Morning, Paul," Wilson said, remaining mounted. "Got some official business here." He pulled a folded paper from his vest. "Notice from the county clerk. your land deeds under review. Paul's jaw tightened as he took the document. Review. Been holding clear title 20 years now. Railroads pushing a right-of-way claim through these parts. Wilson shifted in his saddle, not quite meeting Paul's eyes. Sheriff Dobbs asked, "Me to mention, well, taking on dependents like you have might complicate matters. Folks wondering about your judgment lately." Heat rose in Paul's chest, but he kept his voice level. "My judgment's just fine, Deputy. And those dependents are helping make this place productive again, just passing the message along." Wilson touched his hat brim. "Might want to study that notice careful-like." He wheeled his horse and rode away, leaving Paul standing in the yard with the paper crumpled in his fist. Inside the house, Aurora looked up from her bread-making as Paul entered. She read his expression instantly, but waited until the children were occupied before asking, "Trouble?" "Nothing to fret over," Paul said, though his eyes betrayed his concern. He tucked the notice into his shirt pocket and headed back outside. Not wanting to worry her, but the weight of it pressed against him all day like a hot brand. That evening, after the usual simple supper of beans and cornbread, Aurora gathered the children for their nightly prayers. Paul excused himself to his small desk by the window, pulling out the land deed he'd kept safe all these years. The lamplight threw shadows across the faded ink as he spread it beside the new notice. Legal language filled the page. Hints of threats, wrapped in official terms. The railroad wanted his land. He'd worked with his own hands, land that had been his anchor through years of grief and solitude. Now it seemed his act of mercy at the auction had drawn unwanted attention, he thought. Back to that day in the courthouse square, Aurora and her children standing proud despite their humiliation. He'd acted on instinct, knowing only that he couldn't watch that family be torn apart. But had he brought danger down on all of them? Aurora's voice rose in prayer from the other room. "Lord, we thank you for this roof over our heads and the kindness of those who shelter us." Paul's hands tightened on the papers. The deputy's words echoed in his mind. "Folks wondering about your judgment lately?" He knew what they really meant. A white rancher taking in a colored family, treating them like equals it challenged to many comfortable assumptions. Mr. Hale. Aurora stood in the doorway, her face gentle in the lamplight. "The children are settled. I thought you might want some coffee." He nodded gratefully, trying to hide the papers, but her quick eyes had already seen them. She set the coffee cup down and spoke softly. "Whatever burden you're carrying, you don't have to bear it alone. God never gives us more than we can handle." Paul looked up at her, seeing the quiet strength in her face. "Some folks aim to cause trouble." "About the land? About?" He gestured vaguely, encompassing their unusual household. "About us being here," she finished simply. "We've faced trouble before. Mr. Hale, the Lord sees us through." A coyote's howl drifted through the night air, answered by others in the distance. Paul rose and checked his rifle by the door, a habit of years made more pressing now. The weapon's familiar weight spoke of both protection and responsibility. Aurora watched him, understanding in her eyes. "We'll face whatever comes together. Saya's getting stronger every day, and the girls bring such light to this place. Sometimes the Lord's greatest blessings come wrapped in challenges. Paul nodded slowly, touched by her faith even as worry gnawed him. The coyotes called again, their wild voices echoing across the valley. Inside the house, he heard Ruth and Hannah giggling as they settled into bed, while Isaiah's deeper voice called good night. These people had become more than dependents. In just a week, they'd brought his ranch back to life, filled its empty rooms with purpose and prayer. He might not share Aurora's easy faith, but he knew bone deep that he'd defend this newfound family with everything he had. He checked the door latch one final time, rifle close at hand. Whatever the railroad and sheriff had planned, they'd find. Paul Hell's land and the people he'd chosen to shelter well protected. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the mountain air crisp with early autumn. Aurora stood on the porch, adjusting Ruth's collar and smoothing Hannah's dress while Isaiah hitched the wagon under Paul's guidance. "Been a spell since these wheels rolled to town for worship," Paul admitted, checking the harness straps. His good shirt felt stiff and foreign after years of work clothes. Aurora lifted her chin. "The Lord's house welcomes all his children, Mr. Hale." She had spent the previous evening pressing their best clothes, determined they would present themselves with dignity. The wagon creaked as they settled in, Paul handling the reins while Aurora held the girls close. Isaiah sat straight-backed beside them, his father's watch chain gleaming against his vest. As they drove, the morning sun warmed their faces, and Aurora softly hummed hymns. Approaching town, they passed other wagons and riders heading to service. Some nodded greeting, while others stared openly or turned away. Paul felt Aurora stiffen beside him, but her voice remained steady as she pointed out butterflies to Hannah. The white clapboard church rose before them, its modest steeple reaching skyward. Paul helped Aurora and the children down, conscious of the whispers rippling through the gathering crowd. Some folks he hadn't seen in years watched with undisguised curiosity. "Mama, why are they looking at us?" Ruth whispered. "Stand tall. Sugar," Aurora murmured. "We're here to worship, same as anyone." They climbed the wooden steps, Paul bringing up the rear. Inside, sunlight streamed through simple glass windows, catching dust motes in golden beams. The familiar smell of old hymnals and wood polish brought memories flooding back to Paul his wedding day. His wife's funeral, years of services missed. They found seats near the back, though Aurora's bearing suggested she'd have walked straight to the front pew if Paul had led them there. The girls sat quietly between them, while Isaiah kept a protective watch, his young face solemn. As the church filled, the reactions varied. Some church members nodded politely, a few even smiled. Others clutched their children closer or switched pews. Paul noticed Mrs. Wheeler, the baker's wife, deliberately turn her back. His hands curled into fists, but Aurora's peaceful expression never wavered. The preacher, Reverend Thomas, took the pulpit with measured steps. His weathered face showed surprise at seeing Paul, but his welcome seemed genuine. "Brothers and sisters," he began, "today we examine God's infinite mercy." Through the service, Aurora's voice rose clear and strong during hymns, her children joining in songs she'd clearly taught them well. Even Paul found himself humming along to "What a Friend We Have in Jesus," remembering how his wife had loved that tune. When Aurora's voice soared into amazing grace, several heads turned. The pure notes filled the rafters, carrying years of faith and struggle in each word. Paul watched her sing, seeing not just strength, but a grace that transcended the stares and whispers. "Sweet the sound," she sang. And Paul felt something stir in his chest, something he'd thought long buried with his wife. After the final prayer, some congregants made their way over. Mrs. Miller brought her grandchildren to meet Ruth and Hannah, while old Jim Cooper shook Paul's hand, saying it was good to see him back. As the crowd thinned, Reverend Thomas approached them. "Brother Hale, might I have a word?" He gestured to his study. "Mrs. Johnson, you're welcome too." In the small room lined with books, the preacher closed the door. "I've been meaning to speak with you both." He settled behind his desk, expression grave. "Mrs. Johnson, I knew your husband." Aurora's hands tightened in her lap. "You knew Thomas, Reverend?" "Indeed. He served honorably in the United States Colored Troops, fought bravely for the Union." The preacher pulled out a leather folder. "Which is why I was troubled when I learned about your situation." Paul leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "Thomas Johnson earned a pension. The paperwork was filed properly through the War Department. As his widow, Mrs. Johnson should be receiving regular Payments. Aurora's breath caught. The banker Meister Pike, he said there were no records, that Thomas never completed the forms. That's not true. Reverend Thomas's voice hardened. I helped file them myself. Mr. Pike was meant to handle the distributions. But somehow the papers were lost. Several other widows have had similar troubles. Paul's jaw tightened as pieces fell into place. The auction, the railroad's sudden interest in his land, Pike's smug confidence. He's stealing from widows. I suspect he's diverting funds. Though proving it, the preacher spread his hands. The original papers were sent to his bank for processing. Without them, thank you for telling us, Aurora said quietly. Her face showed a complex mix of grief and hope. To know Thomas did everything right, that he provided for us even after. It means so much. They left the study, finding the children playing under the oak tree outside. The girls ran to Aurora, showing her wildflowers they'd gathered. Isaiah hung back, studying the adults' serious faces. The ride home was quieter, each lost in thought. Paul watched storm clouds gathering over the mountains, matching his mood. The banker's corruption ran deeper than he'd imagined. That evening, after the children were asleep, Paul and Aurora sat at the kitchen table. A single lamp cast warm light as they talked in low voices. If we could find proof, Paul said, expose what Pike's doing. Aurora traced the wood grain with one finger. Those pension papers would mean more than money, Mr. Hale. They'd show Thomas kept his word, did right by us till the end. Her voice caught. Our children should know that about their father. Paul watched her face in the lamplight, seeing the same dignity she'd shown in church. We'll find the truth, Mrs. Johnson. Pike won't get away with this. It won't be easy, she warned. Men like him hold all the power. Maybe. Paul's voice was grim. But they don't hold all the right. From the next room came the soft sounds. Of children's sleeping Ruth's gentle snores, Hannah's murmured dreams, Isaiah's deeper breathing. Aurora listened, drawing strength from their presence. Whatever comes, she said softly, we face it together. For them. Paul nodded, understanding completely. The lamp flickered, casting their shadows on the wall to people from different worlds united by circumstance and growing trust, preparing to stand against injustice. Outside, night settled over the ranch, peaceful and still. But in that quiet kitchen, plans were taking shape that would soon challenge the comfortable corruption of powerful men. The children slept on, unaware that their futures hung in the balance of what would come. The morning sun cast long shadows. Across Paul's ranch yard, as he and Isaiah loaded the last bales onto the wagon, the fresh-cut hay released sweet summer scents into the crisp air. Paul adjusted his hat, studying the sky for signs of weather, while Isaiah secured the load with rope. Reckon we'll get a fair price in town? Isaiah asked, his young face earnest. Beneath the brim of his father's old hat, Paul tightened the final knot. We'll see. Town folks need hay, same as anyone. He didn't voice his deeper concerns about facing the banker again. Aurora appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. The smell of baking bread drifted from the kitchen window. You to be careful now, she called. Ruth and Hannah crowded around her skirts, waving goodbye. We'll be back before sunset, Paul promised. He clicked to the horses, and the loaded wagon creaked into motion. Isaiah sat tall beside him, proud to be trusted with such important business. As they rode, Paul noticed how naturally the boy took to ranch work. Isaiah watched everything, asked smart questions, and showed a gentle hand with the horses. He was nothing like the trouble the sheriff had hinted at. The wagon wheels left twin tracks in the dusty road as they made their way toward town. Other farmers and ranchers nodded as they passed, most keeping their thoughts to themselves about Paul's unusual new arrangements. When they reached town, Paul steered the wagon toward the livery stable where hay was typically sold. At his jaw. tightened as he spotted Banker Pike's building across the street, its fresh paint and brass fixtures declaring its importance. "Isaiah," Paul said, "start unloading the hay. I need to handle some business." The boy nodded, though his eyes showed concern. He'd grown protective of both Paul and his mother over these weeks. Paul crossed the street, dust coating his boots. The bank's interior felt cool and dim after the bright morning. Pike sat at his desk, writing in a ledger with calculated precision. "Mr. Hale," the banker said without looking up. "Come to discuss your land situation. Come to discuss Mrs. Johnson's pension." Paul planted his hands on Pike's desk. "Reverend Thomas says the papers were filed proper. Says you handled the processing." Pike's pen stopped moving. He looked up slowly, his smile tight. The good Reverend's memory must be failing. No such papers exist. They existed right enough, until they reached your hands. That's a serious accusation. Pike's voice grew cold. "I'd advise against spreading such rumors, especially given your current entanglements with colored affairs." Paul leaned closer. "Those affairs are American citizens being robbed of their rights. Her husband fought for this country, and now you fight for her." Pike's smile turned cruel. "How touching. But I'd focus on your own troubles if I were you. The railroad's quite interested in your land. Would be a shame if questions arose about your fitness to maintain it." Paul straightened, his hands fisting at his sides. "That a threat?" "Merely an observation." Pike returned to his ledger. "Good day, Mr. Hale." Paul strode out, anger burning in his chest. The banker's smug certainty confirmed what he'd suspected. Pike and the sheriff were working together, using the railroad's money and influence to steal from those who couldn't fight back. He found Isaiah had already sold half the hayload. The boy had his mother's way with people, honest and direct. They finished their business and headed home. The wagon lighter, but their hearts heavy with worry. Back at the ranch, Aurora had kept busy all day. The house smelled of fresh bread and summer flowers the girls had gathered. She sat in Paul's old rocking chair, reading from her worn Bible while Ruth and Hannah played quietly with cornhusk dolls at her feet. "Fear not," she read, her voice steady and clear, "for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Hannah looked up. "Is that why you're not scared, Mama? Because God helps you?" Aurora touched her daughter's cheek. "That's right, sugar. The Lord gives us strength when we need it most." The sound of wagon wheels made them all look up. Paul and Isaiah appeared. In the yard, the setting sun painting the sky behind them in shades of purple and gold. "Welcome home," Ruth called, running out to meet them. Hannah followed, while Aurora moved to the stove to dish up the waiting supper. Over bowls of beans and fresh bread, Paul related what he'd learned at the bank. Aurora listened quietly, her face composed, but her eyes fierce with determination. "So he admits nothing," she said, when Paul finished. "But his threats tell us plenty." "The railroad's behind it all," Paul agreed. "Pike's probably been stealing pensions to invest in their schemes. But proving it, we must," Aurora said firmly. "Not just for my Thomas's honor, but for all those other widows too. The Lord doesn't give us trials without purpose." Paul studied her face in the lamplight. "I haven't prayed in years," he admitted slowly. "Not since Sarah passed. Felt like God stopped listening." "He never stops," Aurora said softly. "Sometimes we just stop hearing." The children watched this exchange with solemn eyes. Isaiah sat straighter, proud of his mother's wisdom. Ruth and Hannah leaned against each other, tired but content. When the dishes were cleared, Aurora gathered them all together. "Shall we pray?" Paul hesitated, then nodded. They joined hands around the table, black and white, young and old. A family formed by circumstance, but bound now by something deeper. Aurora's voice rose clear and strong. "Dear Lord, we thank you for this day, for the food on our table and the roof over our heads. We ask for guidance in the face of injustice and strength to stand firm in your truth. Watch over us all and help us remember your promises. In Jesus' name, amen." Amen. The children echoed. Paul's voice came last. Rough with emotion he couldn't quite name. They prepared for bed, then the girls in their shared room. Isaiah on his pallet near the stove, Aurora in the small back bedroom Paul had cleared for her. Paul sat alone for a while, watching the lamp's flame dance. Something was changing in him. The emptiness that had ruled his heart since Sarah's death was filling with new purpose. Aurora's quiet faith, the children's trust, the clear right and wrong of their situation, it all worked to wake something he'd thought long dead. He blew out the lamp and headed to his room, the house settling into peaceful silence around him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they were safe, together. And perhaps, just perhaps, watched over by something greater than themselves. Spring crept across the Colorado landscape like a gentle awakening. Tender green shoots pushed through thawed earth, and warm breezes carried the promise of renewal. At Paul Hale's ranch, this season of rebirth seemed especially meaningful. Isaiah wiped sweat from his brow as he and Paul worked the fields behind. The plow horses. The soil turned rich and dark beneath the blade, ready for planting. Paul watched the boys' sure handling of the reins with quiet pride. "You've got a good touch with them horses," Paul said, pausing to rest the team. "Your pa teach you?" "No, sir," Isaiah replied, his voice soft. "Never got the chance. But Mama always said he loved horses too." Near the house, Aurora had marked out a kitchen garden with string and stakes. Her hands worked the soil carefully, tucking in seeds she'd traded for in town: tomatoes, beans, squash, and herbs. Ruth and Hannah helped by sprinkling water wherever they thought it needed, though most seemed to land on each other. "Mama, look," Hannah called, pointing to a bright yellow butterfly that had landed on a fence post. "Can we catch it?" "Let it be. Sugar," Aurora smiled. God made those wings for flying free. The girls soon found other diversions. Paul had shown them how to milk the old brown cow, and they took to the task with determination, if not precision. Most mornings found them in the barn, giggling as they tried to aim the streams of milk into their bucket. "You're getting better," Aurora encouraged, watching Ruth's careful attempts. "Soon you'll be doing all the milking yourself. Then can we make butter?" Hannah asked hopefully. "Like you used to." "We'll see," Aurora promised, her heart warming at these small returns to normal life. The evenings grew longer and sweeter. After supper, they would often gather on the porch, Aurora's clear voice leading them in hymns while Paul sat quietly, absorbing the peace he'd forgotten could exist. Sometimes neighbors would ride by, drawn by the music and laughter that now marked his once silent ranch. The widow Carson brought a berry pie one evening, staying to share it and chat. The Peterson family stopped with extra seedlings from their garden. Even crusty old Jim Baker, who rarely left his own spread, rode up one Sunday afternoon with a load of fence posts just gathering dust in his barn. Paul noticed how Aurora handled these visits with grace. Neither too proud nor too humble. She had a way of making folks feel welcome while maintaining her dignity. It stirred something in him, he thought, had died with Sarah, a longing for companionship. For shared joy. One mild evening, as Aurora cleared the supper dishes and the children played checkers by lamplight, Paul cleared his throat. "There's a social at the church Saturday night," he said, trying to sound casual. "Thought maybe you might want to go." Aurora's hands stilled on the dishcloth. A social, just music and dancing. Some food. Paul shifted in his chair. "Reckon it might be nice to get out a spell." Ruth and Hannah abandoned their game, eyes bright with excitement. "Can we go to Mama?" Ruth pleaded. "Please." Hannah added, bouncing on her toes. Aurora looked at Paul, searching his face. "You sure about this?" He met her gaze steadily. "Wouldn't have asked if I wasn't." Saturday evening found Aurora in her room, fingers trembling as she pinned up her hair. She wore her best dress, faded blue cotton, carefully pressed. The girls watched in fascination as she dabbed a tiny drop of rosewater behind her ears. "You look pretty, Mama," Hannah declared. "Like an angel." Ruth agreed solemnly. Aurora shooed them out to get ready themselves, but their words echoed in her heart. When was the last time she'd dressed for pleasure, not necessity? The thought both thrilled and frightened her. Paul waited. By the wagon, dressed in his Sunday best, his hair slicked down with water. Isaiah helped the girls climb up, then Aurora. Her skirt brushed Paul's arm as she settled beside him, and both pretended not to notice the small spark between them. The churchyard blazed with lanterns when they arrived. Fiddle music spilled from the open doors, mixing with laughter and talk. Folks turned to watch as Paul helped Aurora down from the wagon, some faces welcoming, others cold with judgment. Inside, the children quickly found friends their age, leaving. Paul and Aurora standing somewhat awkwardly near the punch bowl. Aurora felt the stares, the whispers, but held her head high. Paul stood close beside her, his solid presence a comfort. Reverend Thomas approached with his wife, greeting them warmly. "So glad you could join us," he said, genuine pleasure in his voice. The social's been needing some new faces. Others followed his lead, stopping to chat. Miss Sarah, who taught at the school, asked if Ruth and Hannah might join her class. Carson brought them both punch and stayed to discuss garden planning. When the music struck up a Virginia reel, Paul turned to Aurora. "Don't suppose you'd care to dance?" Aurora's heart fluttered. "Been a long time," she warned. "For me too," Paul admitted. "Might step on your toes," but he didn't. Though they moved. Stiffly at first, they found their rhythm. Paul's hand was warm and careful on her waist, and Aurora felt herself relaxing into the simple joy of movement. She caught glimpses of Ruth and Hannah watching wide-eyed Isaiah, trying not to smile too broadly. They danced just the one dance, but it was enough to set tongues wagging. Aurora heard fragments as they moved through the crowd after bold as brass and getting ideas and what's he thinking. But she also heard, never seen Paul look so happy, and those children needed a home, and God works in mysterious ways. The ride home seemed shorter than the journey in. The children dozed in the wagon bed while Paul and Aurora sat companionably silent up front. Stars dusted the velvet sky, and a cool breeze carried the scent of spring flowers. "Thank you, Aurora," said softly. "For tonight, for everything." Paul glanced at her, his face gentle in the starlight. "No need for thanks. There is, though." She smoothed her skirt, choosing words carefully. "Since Thomas died, I've been just surviving. Being strong for the children, trying to keep us together. Tonight, I felt like a woman again. Not just a widow." Paul was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't respond. Then he said, "Know what you mean." House was just walls and roof after Sarah passed. Didn't feel like home till you all came. Their hands rested close together on the wagon seat. Aurora felt Paul's fingers brush hers, tentative as a butterfly's wing. Neither moved away. They rode on through the sweet spring night, the wagon wheels turning steady beneath them, the stars watching over their slow journey home. Something new was growing between them, as fresh and promising as Aurora's garden seedlings. Like those tender plants, it needed time and care to flourish. But spring was a season of hope. And hope was taking root in all their hearts. The morning sun painted the Colorado sky in shades of gold and pink, as Aurora helped Isaiah button his. freshly pressed white shirt. Her fingers trembled slightly as she smoothed his collar, remembering how his father had worn the same expression of nervous excitement before his own baptism years ago. "You look so handsome," she whispered, straightening his shoulders. "You're?" Papa would be mighty proud today. Isaiah ducked his head, but Aurora caught the shine in his eyes. "You think so, Mama?" "I know so." She kissed his forehead, then shooed him toward the door. "Now go on and help Paul with that bench while I get your sister's ready." Outside, the spring air carried the scent of wild sage and fresh-cut pine. Paul worked steadily by the creek, sawing boards for a simple bench where folks could sit during the ceremony. Isaiah joined him, holding the planks steady as Paul hammered them together. "Reckon this'll hold everybody?" Isaiah asked, testing the seat with his hand. Paul nodded, driving in one last nail. "Should do fine." Preacher Thompson said maybe 20 folks might come. He paused, studying the boy's face. "You nervous?" "A little," Isaiah admitted. "But in a good way. Like something big is happening." "Something is." Paul squeezed his shoulder. "Takes courage to stand up and declare your faith before others." Back at the house, Ruth and Hannah twirled in their Sunday dresses while Aurora packed a basket with fried chicken and sweet corn bread for after the ceremony. She'd stayed up late the night before, baking and humming old hymns, her heart full of joy for her son's step of faith. By mid-morning, wagons began arriving. The Carsons came first, then the Petersons, followed by several families from church. They set up blankets along the creek bank, children running to chase butterflies while adults gathered in small groups to talk. Preacher Thompson arrived, wearing his black coat, Bible tucked under his arm. He greeted Isaiah warmly, reviewing the words they would say together. Aurora watched from the porch, dabbing her eyes with her apron. "He's grown into a fine young man," Paul said quietly beside her. "That he has." Aurora smiled through her tears. "Sometimes I see so much of Thomas in him, it near takes my breath away." The sun climbed higher as folks settled onto Paul's new bench or found spots on the grass. The creek burbled peacefully, its clear water perfect for the baptism. Preacher Thompson raised his hands for quiet. And the ceremony began. Isaiah stood tall in his white shirt, answering the preacher's questions about his faith with a strong, clear voice. Aurora's heart swelled with pride as he testified to God's love and mercy, speaking of how the Lord had provided for their family through Paul's kindness. "And do you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior?" the preacher asked solemnly. "I do," Isaiah declared. The congregation sang "Shall We Gather at the River" as Isaiah and the preacher waded into the creek. The cool water swirled around, their legs catching the sunlight like scattered diamonds. Preacher Thompson raised his hand in blessing. "Upon your profession of faith, I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." He lowered Isaiah backward into the water. For a moment, all was silent except the gentle splash of the creek. Then Isaiah rose, water streaming from his face, joy radiating from his smile. "Amen." Several voices called. Ruth and Hannah clapped excitedly. But before Isaiah could wade to shore, the thunder of hoofbeats shattered the peace. Sheriff Dobbs rode up with 4 deputies, their horses kicking up dust as they surrounded the gathering. People scrambled to their feet, women pulling children close as the armed men dismounted. "Well, ain't this touching?" Dobbs drawled, spurs jingling as he strode forward. He pulled papers from his vest. "Got some business to attend to." Paul stepped forward, placing himself between the sheriff and Isaiah, who was hurriedly splashing toward shore. "This is a baptism service, Sheriff. Whatever business you have can wait. 'Fraid not." Dobbs unfolded the papers with deliberate slowness. "First off, this here deed to your ranch has been declared void by the Railroad Commission. Seems there were some irregularities in the filing." A murmur ran through the crowd. Paul's face darkened. That's nonsense, and you know it. I've held clear title for 15 years. And second, Dobbs continued as if Paul hadn't spoken, I'm here to arrest that boy for horse theft.
What?
Aurora's cry cut through the shocked silence. That's a lie. Isaiah had reached the bank, water still dripping from his clothes. I never stole nothing, Sheriff. Got a signed complaint, says different. Dobbs nodded to his deputies, says, You took old man Miller's bay mare night before last. I was here all night, Isaiah protested. Paul and Mama can tell you, shut your mouth, boy. Dobbs strode forward, pulling iron manacles from his belt. Paul blocked his path. You're not taking him anywhere. This is nothing but railroad business, trying to pressure me about the land. The sheriff's face hardened. Without warning, he swung his fist, catching Isaiah across the jaw. The boy stumbled backward as Aurora screamed. Two deputies grabbed Isaiah's arms while he was still dazed, roughly clamping the manacles around his wrists. No. Aurora rushed forward, but Paul caught her arms. He's innocent. Please, he's just a boy. Ruth and Hannah began crying, clinging to each other as their brother was dragged toward the waiting horses. The congregation stood frozen, horror and helplessness on their faces. Some women turned away, unable to watch. Others muttered prayers under their breath. Take him to town, Dobbs ordered his men. I'll be along directly. He turned back to Paul with a cold smile. You've got 1 week to clear out of this ranch. Railroad's claiming it under eminent domain. This isn't over, Paul said, his voice low and dangerous. Oh, I reckon it is. The sheriff mounted his horse. Unless you want that boy facing a hanging judge instead of just a theft charge. They rode away in a cloud of dust, Isaiah stumbling between the horses. Aurora's legs gave way, and Paul helped her sink onto the new-built bench that should have held witnesses to joy, not injustice. Ruth and Hannah ran to her, sobbing as she gathered them close. The preacher approached, his face grave. This is a grave wrong, Paul. We all saw it. Saw what good it did, Paul spat bitterly. But he gentled his voice as he helped Aurora to her feet. Let's get you home. The gathered families dispersed quietly, leaving behind half-eaten picnic baskets and trampled grass. The creek continued its peaceful song, oblivious to the pain on its banks. Paul drove the wagon home slowly, one arm supporting Aurora, while she held her weeping daughters. Night fell heavy over the ranch. Paul lit the lamps and stoked the fire, but no light could chase away the shadows in their hearts. Aurora sat in her rocking chair, tears sliding silently down her cheeks as she stared at Isaiah's empty place at the table. His white baptismal shirt hung dripping on the porch, a testament to joy turned to ashes. Ruth and Hannah had finally cried themselves to sleep, curled together in their bed like wounded birds. Paul sat by the door, his rifle across his knees, watching the darkness beyond the windows. Every few minutes, Aurora's soft sobs broke the silence. We'll get him back, Paul said finally, his voice rough with emotion. I swear it, Aurora. We'll prove his innocence and save the ranch. She looked at him through tear-filled eyes. How? The sheriff, the railroad, the banker, they're all working together. What chance do we have against such power? Truth's more powerful than any of them. Paul checked his rifle's action, the metal gleaming in the lamplight. And I won't let them destroy this family, not while I draw breath. Aurora drew a shuddering breath, her hands clasped in prayer. But no words came, only the cry of her mother's heart for her imprisoned son. Outside, a coyote wailed at the rising moon, its lonely song echoing the grief that filled the ranch house. Paul's fingers tightened on his rifle as he kept his vigil, his jaw set with grim determination. The night stretched long before them. But somewhere in the darkness, justice waited to be claimed. Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the ranch house in shades of gray. Aurora hadn't slept more than moments all night, her prayers filling the dark hours. Now she knelt by the cold hearth, her Bible open before her, whispering psalms of deliverance between quiet sobs. "Lord, protect my boy," she pleaded, fingers tracing the worn pages. "Give us strength to face this trial." Paul moved quietly through the kitchen, not wanting to disturb her. Communion with God. The coffee pot clattered softly on the stove as he prepared for the ride into town. His movements were measured but held a tight energy, like a spring wound too tight. "I'll speak to the sheriff," he said, pulling on his boots. "See what can be done." Aurora looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. "Be careful, Paul. That man has no mercy in him." The morning air bit cold as Paul saddled his horse. The familiar routine of checking cinch and stirrups helped calm his rising anger. He mounted up and rode out just as the sun cleared the eastern hills. In town, Paul tied his horse outside the jail, dust from the street coating his boots. Inside, Sheriff Dobbs lounged behind his desk, a malicious smile playing at his lips. "Come to fetch the thief," Dobbs drawled. Paul's hands clenched at his sides. "Isaiah's innocent, and you know it. This is railroad business, pure and simple. Boy will stand trial." The sheriff's chair creaked as he leaned back. "Judge arrives next week. Might go easier on him if certain folks were more cooperative about." "Their land, I'll appeal to the judge myself," Paul growled. "Tell him how you're threatening an innocent boy to steal my ranch." Dobbs laughed, an ugly sound. "Judge Morton. Railroad's been keeping his pockets lined for years. But go ahead. Maybe he'll give the boy a proper hanging instead of just prison time." While Paul confronted the sheriff, Aurora hitched the wagon and took Ruth and Hannah to the preacher's house. The girls sat quiet and pale, holding hands in the back of the wagon. Their usual chatter was replaced by worried glances toward the jail as they passed through town. Preacher Thompson welcomed them into his study, his wife bringing tea and sympathy. Aurora's hands trembled as she held her cup. "Please," she said, "Isaiah needs character witnesses." "You've known him since we arrived. Of course I'll testify," the preacher assured her. "The boy's faith is genuine, his heart true." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But the sheriff holds considerable power here. We'll need more than good character to sway the judge." The sun was setting when Paul returned to the ranch, his face etched with weariness and worry. Aurora had supper waiting, a simple meal of beans and cornbread that no one had the heart to eat. "The sheriff made things clear," Paul said, pushing his plate away. "Unless we find those pension papers and prove the banker's corruption, Isaiah could hang." His voice cracked on the last word. Aurora's spine straightened, her faith rising. Against despair. "God will provide a way," she declared. "He didn't bring us this far to abandon us now." Ruth and Hannah picked at their food, their usual chatter silenced by fear for their brother. The empty chair at the table seemed to mock their fractured family, a constant reminder of Isaiah's absence. Paul reached across the table, taking Aurora's hand. "We'll find those papers," he promised. "Whatever it takes." The lamp flickered, casting long shadows on the wall as they sat in shared worry. Their evening prayer heavy with pleas for justice and mercy. The next morning, Paul and Aurora set out. Early for Fort Carson, leaving Ruth and Hannah with the widowed Mrs. Peterson next door. The summer sun beat down as their horses kicked up dust along the trail. Aurora's determination matched the rhythm of her horse's hooves against the hard packed earth dot at the fort. They found a clerk hunched over stacks of papers. He barely glanced up until Paul explained their mission. Aurora stood tall, her quiet dignity catching the clerk's attention. "Please," she said softly, "my husband served with honor." The clerk's resistance melted. By lantern light, he thumbed through weathered files until he found it, Official records showing pension papers had indeed been sent to their town months ago. Aurora's tears fell silently as she held the precious document. On their long ride home, Paul broke the comfortable silence. "You're the strongest person I know, Aurora." They stopped at Willow Creek to water the horses. Aurora turned to Paul, her eyes bright. "Thank you for believing in us when no one else would." Dawn was breaking when they reached the ranch. Ruth and Hannah ran out, wrapping their arms around their mother, their faces shining with relief. The courthouse buzzed with tension as Paul, Aurora, and the preacher approached the judge's bench. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Aurora's hands trembled slightly as she presented the Army document, but her voice remained steady. Judge Harrison studied the papers through wire-rimmed spectacles, his frown deepening. "Sheriff Dobbs, Banker Pike. This seems a serious oversight." Pike's face reddened. "Your Honor, surely a simple clerical error." "Silence," the judge cut him off. "I'm ordering an inquiry into these missing pension funds, and Mr. Isaiah Johnson's trial will be delayed pending investigation." Angry mutters rose from railroad men clustered near the door. Paul guided Aurora through the crowd, shielding her from their hostile stares. That evening, Aurora held her daughters close by lamplight. "God sees everything," she assured them softly. "He'll make things right." Paul sat in his chair nearby, watching her quiet strength with wonder. Before retiring, Aurora touched his arm gently. "The Lord sent you to us," she whispered. Words failed. Paul, but for the first time since his wife's death, he bowed his head in earnest prayer. The morning sun streamed through courthouse windows as witnesses filed in one by one. Isaiah sat straight-backed beside Paul, his clean shirt pressed for the occasion. The preacher's testimony rang clear and true about the boy's character. While neighbors spoke of his honest work at the ranch, Sheriff Dobbs shuffled his papers, offering only vague accusations. When Paul took the stand, his steady voice exposed the banker's schemes. Pike's face turned purple as his lies unraveled. Judge Harrison's gavel cracked like thunder. Isaiah Johnson is acquitted. Furthermore, the sheriff's conduct warrants investigation. And Paul Hale's deed stands protected by treaty water rights. The courtroom erupted. Aurora rushed forward, wrapping Isaiah in her arms as tears flowed freely. Paul clasped the preacher's hand in gratitude. Outside, townspeople gathered, some nodding with newfound respect. A group of neighbors insisted on riding home with them in celebration. That evening, their table overflowed with simple fare and joy as Aurora led them in heartfelt prayer. The ranch hummed with fresh energy in the weeks after the trial. Neighbors rode in daily, bringing offerings of friendship's still warm apple, pies, and sacks of corn seed. Men gathered to repair broken fences, while women shared stories on the porch. Aurora's garden flourished with tender shoots of green. Ruth and Hannah's laughter rang across the yard as they chased wobbling calves. Isaiah worked proudly alongside Paul, learning the ways of cattle and horses. One evening, Paul spent hours crafting a solid oak table for the porch. "Every family needs a gathering place," he said quietly, his meaning clear in Aurora's soft smile. As dusk settled, neighbors joined them around the new table. Lantern-light glowed as voices lifted in amazing grace. Aurora's hand found Paul's. Across the weathered wood while the children sang. Above them, stars pierced the velvet sky as Paul whispered his gratitude for this unexpected gift of family. Thank you for watching. If this one reached you, consider subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow with more meaning, more humanity.